Feeling a little under the weather today, but it's not going to stop me from reviewing. So let's get into it, shall we? The Smashing Machine is Benny Safdie's solo directorial debut, written and directed by him and starring Dwayne Johnson, also produced, and Emily Blunt, and details the story of Mark Kerr during his tenure in the UFC, the very early days of the UFC, between the years of 1997 and 2000. This movie was on my list of highly anticipated movies of 2025. As someone with roots in the UFC, as I've worked extensively with them for the last 7, almost 8 years, I actually really wanted to see how this was going to play out. And on top of that, considering the failure that was Black Adam, I wanted to see how The Rock would bounce back after a sort of public failure. And Red One definitely didn't do him any sort of justice, but the first trailer for The Smashing Machine shows a more grounded and more artistic side that we haven't really gotten to see yet. And that's really where the main topic of discussion of this movie really surrounds. It's that we are seeing The Rock actually explore legitimate forms of acting. Now, other wrestlers turned actors have had their comeuppance and had their very, very public personas disappear in form of art. Dave Bautista with movies like Blade Runner and Dune, as well as, even Spectre for a time. And now recently we've seen John Cena rise in the form of Peacemaker, which is a role that he has not only taken for his own, but has gotten much public support. And with the newest episode of Peacemaker coming out, really showing his acting skills, John Cena has all but turned from wrestler to actor to just full-blown actor. And Dwayne Johnson really hasn't had anything like that yet. He's always been a box office commodity that just happens to have good charm and manages to actually be a pretty decent actor overall. But this is the movie that was really going to shake away that wrestler-turned-actor form and really deliver on the actor element of it all. Does Dwayne succeed? Is he no longer Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and now just Dwayne Johnson, artistic actor? Yeah, he does a pretty fucking phenomenal job. This is a very vulnerable and very grounded performance. And the movie is just as much so. Benny Safdie's direction is almost very much so impeccable. To make matters better, you have Emily Blunt as Dawn, Mark Kerr's wife, maybe girlfriend for most of the movie. Who plays a very broken but very supportive girlfriend. And overall, you have all these other UFC fighters coming in playing either versions of themselves or versions of other fighters. And, I won't get into that, but they do a very serviceable and very good job. And from a performance and technical perspective, this is a very, very good movie. I don't think there's a single poor performance, and I think everyone does their due diligence. And yes, I do believe Dwayne Johnson will in fact get an Oscar nomination, which is what I think the point of this movie was. The fights are real, and you feel every punch, you feel every loss, and I do think the movie's theme on loss is very, very potent. The main message of this movie, I think a lot of men can relate to. Myself included. I really love the just because you lose doesn't make you a loser. Very, very Rocky, so to speak. That being said, this movie's kind of a mess. You see, instead of actually telling like a full biopic, instead it chooses to just look at the life in this specific moment in time. And due to how breakneck the pacing is, it doesn't allow you to really absorb the moments the way that this movie probably wanted you to. And on top of that, sometimes the dialogue doesn't flow as naturally as I'm sure they were hoping for. There are some lines that just don't work. And no matter how good the delivery is from Dwayne and Emily, it just never feels quite natural. And on top of that, the movie is, like I said, edited at a breakneck pace. Those 2 hours fly by very quickly. But at the same time, you're never really allowed to absorb the moments. And I think that works against the movie. There are only a couple points where the movie really slows down and allows you to feel some moments between Mark and Dawn, or Mark and his loss. But then it just continues moving on. You know, there's not enough time for this, we gotta keep going. There's so many things that I would have loved to have seen more. And there are so many ideas that they could have fleshed out more. Like, for example, there's a point in the movie where Mark Kerr goes to rehab, and we do see the aftermath of Mark in rehab. You never see him exploring rehab, and you don't see the ramifications of Dawn's feeling of abandonment play out in a way that really feels genuine. It's just kind of disappointing. And that's really where I think I fall with this movie. It is definitely disappointing. It's not terrible by any measure of the definition, because the best parts of the movie, weirdly enough, are the soap opera elements between Mark and Dawn. All of those moments where they're just fighting and they're loving and fighting at the same time is really where this movie shines. And as a matter of fact, it's where I think Dwayne really shines as an actor. When he's by himself, he doesn't really command the screen as much as when he has someone working off of. It's a very odd sort of ordeal. Sure, when he has those quiet moments to himself, it definitely works, especially the ending, but it really, really feels gritty and amazing when he has Emily, who, by the way, he and Emily Blunt have such amazing chemistry together. They're just so good, and it's so palpable. And every time they're on screen, you feel the emotion. You feel the weight of his sadness and the weight of her anger and frustration. It works. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but a movie about fighting works best when it's in its soap opera elements. And like I said before, this movie's a bit of a mess. One of the elements towards that statement is that this movie doesn't really know what it wants to be at times. Sometimes it wants to be a sports documentary style biopic with the fights. Other times it wants to be an actual soap opera. Like I said, the dialogue is not the best, and that is definitely felt during elements of those soap opera scenes. The acting and pretty good direction saves it, but the dialogue just really brings it down. As I mentioned before, the pacing moves way too quickly, but because of it moving too quickly, it's also choppy at times. We move from scene to scene to scene, and in order to help keep the flow going, the music is constantly playing, and at times it just gets overbearing to the point where you're like, okay, I'm fucking lost. What is going on here? Remember how at the beginning you kind of could tell I'm a little confused as to who Dawn was to Mark Kerr overall? That's because the movie never explicitly states who she is until the very end, where it turns out they weren't actually married. They were just dating for long periods of time. And that's another big thing. This movie is, I get what they were trying to go for. This is trying to be a window in time. No explanation, just here's the life. This is what it was like. No context, just look at what's going on. Keep pushing forward. That works for good chunks of it, but it also works against it. There are some points where you don't need the context. When he's training and when he's working with his coach, you don't really need to know what their relationship is. You just need to know that they're working together, and that's fine. And that works. But for example, there are points where they keep going to Japan, and it wasn't until later that you find out that that was because, for a time, fighting sports within the confines of America, with the exception of boxing, was getting banned, and nobody wanted to have these fights here. So they had to go to Japan where it was a lot more laxed and people were willing to, have these sports play out. You don't see that play out at all through the movie. You have to look it up online and get that information, which is deeply frustrating because those are questions that people will wonder throughout the movie and wonder why it doesn't get answered. I know I'm going all over the place here, but remember how I said there are certain things that aren't shown or explained? Like, for example, we aren't actually shown Mark's recovery process. We do see him talk to a sponsor at times, but we never actually see him really dive into his withdrawals or him actually exploring his time during his rehabilitation, which I think could have very much been an interesting thing to explore. But we're also not shown or given answers as to why these guys that broke the rules during the tournament were still allowed to compete. I know I'm ragging on this movie a bit, and I think I have every right to. By all measures of the definition, this is a pretty decent movie. I had so much fun with it, but at the same time, it was also deeply frustrating. The best way I can describe it, it's like watching the theatrical version of Justice League, and I know I'm going to keep using that as an example for the foreseeable future. The theatrical version feels like a 4-hour movie that was definitely shaved down to 2, and this movie has that same feel. This feels like it should have been at least a 2.5, maybe 3-hour movie, a grand epic biopic that really explores this tumultuous time in this man's life, but a lot of it just got shaved off. And I feel like so much more could have been explored. At the end of the day, this just kind of feels like wasted potential for something a lot more nuanced and gritty for The Rock to really get his teeth into and explore in ways that I don't think he would have ever thought of. That's really where I fall in terms of my thoughts of this movie. Smashing Machine is by no means a bad movie. In fact, technically speaking, it's an above-average movie with performances that make you forget about the certain elements that would frustrate you. Dwayne Johnson's definitely going to get his Oscar nomination, and rightfully so. He deserves this more so than I think other performances this year have. He stands out, and I think that's really commendable. Emily Blunt gives a phenomenal performance, and Benny Safdie's direction saves a lot of poorly written scenes. But then again, those scenes are written by him and are edited by him, so, take that with a grain of salt. Now, let's get to the verdict, shall we? The Smashing Machine is a well-directed, well-acted movie about a tumultuous time in a prolific fighter's life that is unfortunately bogged down by wonky dialogue and underwhelming editing. It is a bit of a disappointment for an otherwise pretty decent film. I give The Smashing Machine I don't know what to give it. It's odd because there are certain parts that I get that they don't explain or explore because I work in that industry. But it's not going to be the same for other people. So for me personally, I would give it a 7 out of 10. It's good, but not great. Go see it at a matinee. Maybe not full price, but definitely go see it. But at the same time, most people aren't like me. They're not so deep within the sport that they're going to understand certain elements or certain explanations as to why certain things play out the way they do. So, by all accounts, this is probably more objectively speaking a 6 out of 10. It's above average. Good, but nowhere near great. I'm Noah Pfister. This has been oh my god, this movie frustrated me. I'm Noah Pfister. This has been the Movie Report. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll be sure to see you on the next review. Ugh.